Hello everybody. This is Bridging the Opportunity Divide, acknowledging community assets and partnering to co-create social action. I'm Jean-Luc Pierite, and with me co-hosting today is going to be Sonya Pryor-Jones.
Hi everyone, this is Sonya. Nice to be here with you.
Yep. So yes, I think you know we have about 10 minutes to go, and we have about 17 people. I don't know if we want to just go around really quickly and give names if you're able to just kind of like unmute yourself. I'll call on Terry first.
Hello, I'm Terry Willingham. I'm in Tampa, Florida, and I'm the program director for the Advanced Manufacturing and Robotics Center Fab Lab, which is based in a mall in an urban part of Tampa near the University of South Florida. And we do a lot of community partnering, so this particular talk looked really interesting and hopefully something we can continue to learn from. So cool. We do a lot of workforce education development, STEM education, entrepreneurship development, and things like that.
Okay, cool. Cedric, 3 seconds.
Yeah, my name is Cedric. I oversee the ID lab at the Sacred Heart University Makerspace, and I'm trying to help a little bit with the Fab House project that Sonya will tell us about.
Okay. Dawn Arrington.
Hi everyone, I'm Dawn Arrington. I'm the Cleveland Action Strategist for IOB, and I am also on the something committee with Fab House. Is it advisory committee? Thank you.
Cool. Jack Kahn.
Yeah, I work at Schenectady City High School as a classroom teacher of Fab equipment and content.
Okay. Andres Muniz.
Hi, warehouse manager at Participatory City.
Okay. See Katie Perry.
I am a mobile Fab Lab manager for the Schenectady City School Districts in New York.
Okay. Maria.
Hi, my name is Maria Gazdick. I am from Sacred Heart University and helping Cedric and Sonya on a project.
Cool. Greg?
Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Buckland. I run the Fab Lab at Lena Park Community Development Corporation in the Mattapan neighborhood of Dorchester, of Boston.
Okay. And Angela?
Hello, I'm Angela Barbour, and I'm from Brazil. I'm a Fabrication instructor here in São Paulo.
Okay. Evelyn?
Yes, hi, my name is Evelyn. I am a Sacred Heart student, and I am helping Sonya and Cedric on a project as well.
Okay. Ellie?
Hi, I'm Ellie Bueller. I'm the manager of Fab Lab NOLA in New Orleans.
All right, Nola in the house. Tyler? All right. We'll skip ahead to Pamela.
Hello, everyone.
All right.
Here.
All right. Carlos Oliveira. Okay. J.R. Logan.
Yeah, I'm J.R. Logan from Make Haven in New Haven, Connecticut.
Okay.
And I'm the director.
Okay, cool. Christy Metz.
Hi, I'm the project coordinator for Metabolic Foundation in Aruba.
Aristarco. He's connecting. I'll give him a second. We'll come back to you, Aristarco. Aaron.
Hi, I'm Erin. Erin Link. I run the U.S. office for Seed Studio.
Okay. Robin.
Hi, I'm Robin Jacobowitz. I work at SUNY New Paltz in New York.
Okay. See, Tony is connected to the audio now. Tony Siebold? Okay. Jose Cortazar? Okay, probably just watching. And Aristarco is still connecting, so we'll go ahead. Yeah, if I haven't called you, just go ahead and introduce yourself whenever you want to jump in. Great to meet everybody. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sonya, who's going to tell us a bit about her. Well, actually, before we do, just want to go through the session description. So how do you best cultivate community and co-design digital fabrication spaces with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color? Or the acronym is BIPOC. Join Sonya Pryor-Jones, founder of Fab House, and Jean-Luc Pierite, president of the North American Indian Center of Boston, as they share their work with community-based Fab Labs makerspaces in Cleveland and Boston. Offer your expertise and ideas for building community and co-designing programs that cultivate social change and create a more just and equitable community for invention. So if you attended, I recognize a couple of names from yesterday's session, but we had a session yesterday with Sherry where we talked about sort of the moment that we're in, centering Black Lives Matter and the challenges to social structures. In this session, we're going to be a bit more, and Sonya, feel free to correct me, but I think we're going to be a bit more about like the social interventions and sort of like strategies, kind of coming up with how do we actually respond to the moment of the pandemic, but then also the challenges to social systems that we're faced with right now. Sonya, do you want to clarify any of that?
The only thing I add is for those who aren't familiar with Sherry, since we have a few people out of network or still getting to know the network, Sherry Lasser is the president of the Fab Foundation. And Jean-Luc and I come to this space today with multiple roles and hats. I serve as the Chief Implementation Officer at the Fab Foundation, while also founding this very specific project called Fab House that I'm going to talk about. And Jean-Luc, you want to share some of your other work?
I think I'll wait till you're done.
Okay.
There are some key data points. I think we can kind of like go over these in both the Fab House section and the NACOB section. Sonya, do you have anything on the first 2 points, just to kind of give some context?
Yeah, I think I wanted to, so for those of you who are not familiar with Cleveland, Ohio, I'm focused very specifically on an east side, predominantly African-American neighborhood called Glenville. And these are just a few data points about Glenville that I thought would be appropriate to share during this conversation. I have more. One thing that I did not do in this write-up is also share some data points that really speak to assets in the community, but I will speak to that as we're talking and moving along.
Mm-hmm. And just some context for the data points that I'm sharing. The second three. So in the language that I'm going to be using, I'm going to be talking about what's called urban Indians, and these are indigenous peoples who are living outside of their tribal territories within the United States, mostly within urban areas like Boston or Chicago or New York or so forth. And overall, the population of indigenous peoples who in the United States are categorized as American Indians and Alaska Natives. Of that whole population, over 78% of us live in urban areas. So most of us live off tribal lands. And also, so with that, there is a need for a network of community centers called urban Indian centers. They serve the social, they provide social, economic, and cultural services. And also there is despite the fact that we do live in urban areas, we still are affected by a digital divide, meaning a disparity in access to broadband, but then also going down to like access to computers even. So, so Sonya, take it away.
Sure. And so I'm starting with this slide about who I am as a personal, from a personal perspective, because it ties to the heart of this project, Fab House, and why I'm doing it and where I'm doing it. And so I wanted to not just focus so much on the professional part of our work, but also the personal part. I think when we are creating spaces in community with community, it's really important that people know who you are and what you're about, because that's where trust is built. And so for me personally, I am my family. And so the images that you see here have to do with my family. First, I am Sonya Pryor-Jones, the daughter of Patricia Ann, the granddaughter of Sonoya, and the great-granddaughter of Jessie May, and actually the great-great-granddaughter of Queen Esther, who didn't like to take photographs, so we don't have a photo of her. But this first photo that you see with 3 women in an old Polaroid is my mother, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother. And I had the pleasure to be raised and reared by all of them during different points in my life. I am also a mother. I have 2 children. My glamour shot here at the top, my daughter Ashantis, and my recent graduate from high school, my son AJ. I am the daughter of Stephen Pryor, who is holding me there in front of a Christmas tree in an older photo. I am the big sister of Stephen Pryor Jr. and Tanya Pryor. And I'm also the wife of Alan Jones, who I'll get to celebrate 25 years of marriage with in about 30 days. And so I say all of that to say these are the people who ground me and why I do what I do, and many of the lessons that I've learned and the lessons I'm still learning, I'm doing with these people. And so my grandmother, Sonoy, migrated like many African Americans from the South to Cleveland, Ohio. And she did that with 5 children. She got married a second time in Cleveland, Ohio, and settled in the Glenville neighborhood. And Glenville, as a neighborhood and a community, was a community at that time for working and middle-class African-American families, many of them going into home ownership for the first time. And so you think about that era anywhere between the late 60s to the mid 70s, where you had a huge uptake of that. Can you go to the next slide, Jean-Luc?
Sure.
And so the neighborhood that my grandmother decided to move into versus the neighborhood of today look pretty different. In addition to growing up in a family home in the Glenville neighborhood with my grandmother, at different points of our lives, I also convinced my husband when we bought our first home that we should buy into the city of Cleveland. At that time in the early 90s, we had a mayor named Michael White who was really pushing for home ownership in the city, and really thought that that was tied well into thinking about building neighborhoods and family values and things of that nature that tend to be associated with home ownership. My family and I moved out of the Glenville neighborhood about 18 years ago, to be exact, when we had our son, and I could talk more about that later. But when you look at the data here collected by a few students who are working on a community assessment project, you'll see the population in Glenville in terms of age. A large segment of the population is between 20 and 64 years old. You'll see in terms of race, very much still an African-American community. But what we will also note is that community has changed. The physical location of Glenville is very unique, and I think also a huge asset because Glenville is centered right off of Lake Erie, which is one of our natural water resources here in the US. And it is also a part of the Meds and Eds community, or the cultural arts community that makes up Cleveland, called University Circle. If you can go to the next slide, Jean-Luc. And Glenville has a few things that is known for. I mentioned the Meds and Eds. So there's an aerial view in the bottom right of University Circle, where you have Wade Oval, you have the Cleveland Museum of Art, you have Severance Hall, you have Case Western Reserve University, the Cleveland Institute of Art, the Cleveland Institute of Music, real staple institutional places of culture and learning. Glenville also is home to the Cultural Gardens. This is a significant landscape of gardens that showcase the many cultures of Cleveland. Two of them are in the top right of the slide that are pretty important and dear to me. The one up top is the African American Cultural Garden, Cleveland being a majority minority city, and the first major city to have an African American mayor, in Carl Stokes in '68. Interestingly enough, that cultural garden for African Americans just went up in 2016. So these are the, sort of kinds of things that we have to think about in terms of community and power dynamics. And then the garden right underneath that is the Italian Cultural Garden. And that's actually the outdoor space where my husband and I got married. And we actually lived in walking distance from that garden when we lived in the Glenville neighborhood. Some other assets in the community: Glenville at one point, before African Americans were there, was a significant neighborhood for the Jewish population. And the two Jewish young men who were behind Superman actually attended Glenville High School. So you see the Glenville Tarblooders sign there, and there is a Superman house that is in the neighborhood dedicated to that feat. And then there is new investment in Glenville, and that new investment is showcasing itself in a new facility called Glen Village that's mixed retail and an incubation space for new businesses, as well as a co-work space and new housing, which is in that bottom left part of the slide. And Glenville has had an interesting history, including some celebrities. I think as of 2016, there were 15 young men who were or had played in the NFL that had gone to Glenville High School. There was also a place where a lot of comedians and actors and actresses have come out of Glenville High School. The old blaxploitation movies had one of their biggest stars come out of Glenville High School, Superfly. Thank you, Dawn. I could not remember the name of the movie. Dawn's given some great backup history points for me in the chat, so please watch that. And then Steve Harvey, which most of you know from comedy and TV shows, also attended Glenville High School. Next slide, please. And now in thinking about what Glenville is today, and some of the challenges that the neighborhood faces, and in thinking about this really unique situation I found myself in professionally, I started to wonder, could I figure out a way to take what I see that's beautiful and beneficial in the world of digital fabrication and the Fab Lab network and somehow bring that to the Glenville neighborhood? Now, mind you, I have been involved with Fab and actually first got introduced to Fab in my role as an educator when we supported bringing a Fab Lab to MC² STEM High School, which is one of the first schools anywhere in the world to have a Fab Lab in it, and saw some good things happening there for students. Fast forward to over 10 years later, I'm still pointing to 1, 2, 3 students that I can say, look at the great things that Fab has done with and for them. And that's a bit challenging and limiting. And so thinking about getting Fab into community outside of traditional institutions is how Fab House really came about. and also being inspired by some other projects across the country. Pamela, who is here on the call, once I started talking to her about the idea, she told me about a project called G Code House in Boston that's doing some amazing work by taking a home in a neighborhood and bringing coding to that neighborhood, specifically focused on women of color. There's also a project called the Tuxedo Project in Detroit that someone took their childhood home and transformed it into a space to teach literacy and the arts. There's the work of Theaster Gates in Chicago, where he took a building in Chicago in the middle of a neighborhood and brought the arts there. And so there's a huge movement of people bringing the arts and technology into the hearts of neighborhood. And it's that whole FUBU perspective, for us, by us, that I was really interested in. I also recognize as an international studies undergrad major that the world is global, and it's really important to be globally connected. And so the benefit of the Fab Lab network and the Fab approach is you have both the technology as well as the international human capital that's associated with it. And so when you merge all those things together, you get Fab House. And so the home that you see on the left side was the home that my husband and I lived in, the very first house we ever purchased. And the home over the years have been used as a place for different people to live in and the family. As they transitioned, it had also been a rental property. And it's hard to have a rental property. So we decided we were going to close that house up and not do those things. And when I thought about Fab House, I thought about it, how do we bridge this opportunity divide from a neighbor to neighbor perspective? If I have friends like Cedric who are living in the house for a residency term, he gets to know other people in the neighborhood on a personal level. They then trust Cedric, and there's this wonderful exchange for teaching people about digital fabrication, while Cedric is also learning about the people and the culture of the neighborhood. And so the way Fab House works, you can see on the right side of this slide, the drawing. The basement is your traditional Fab Lab space. The first floor of the home is a bit of an open, collaborative space. And then the upper floors, the next two floors up are private space, and the residential space for the instructor who is in residence at that given time. And projects like this do not happen with one person. And so I'm very grateful to IOB and to Dawn and her strategic thinking to help me set up a campaign there. City architecture, there's a lot that you have to do with the city in order to get a house properly zoned for this kind of use. Of course, the Fab Foundation and the Fab Lab Network. Fab House is currently being incubated out of the Fab Foundation. Fab Foundation does that for emerging projects in the network. Sacred Heart University, thanks to Cedric and the students in the MBA program. I think we have Evelyn and Maria with us today. They're helping think about a case statement for the project and building out some fundraising documentation. You cannot do a project like this in the neighborhood without your council person. So partnering with a council person there. And then Cleveland Leadership Center hosts an annual event where they encourage Clevelanders to pitch social ideas. And I pitched the Fab House idea at their event now almost 2 years ago. And it really jump-started my energy and my focus to work on the project. We also have our community advisory board members, Don Arrington, who's here, Cedric Fleming, who's also here and very active in our Fab Lab network, a fabber and a maker. Andrea Fields, also active in our network. Adam Savage, Representative Stephanie House, who is a state representative in Ohio, but also an engineer and a STEM advocate. Mother Joan Southgate and Eric Tate are residents in the Glenville neighborhood. Eric Tate is a maker himself, primarily working with metals. He's a union sheet metal worker. And Mother Joan Southgate is, you should Google her name. She is a 90-year-old young woman in the neighborhood who has done a lot around lifting up through her effort called In Their Path, what happened with African Americans escaping enslavement, and just an activist in the community, and has lived in Glenville probably definitely over 65 years at this point. And so those are the people and the organizations helping to move this project forward. And what we're trying to do is bring digital fabrication to the neighborhood so that we can break down barriers, and we can create opportunities, but doing it in a way that also humanizes the technology by creating neighbors in a neighborhood. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
I forgot about this. So as you can see from the home, Fab House is a new project. We are still working on the work with the city. So the house is not open. We have planned a big kickoff event after this conference, with the hope that we would get a number of members from our Fab Lab network to come to Cleveland after they finish their time in Canada. But as you all know, COVID-19 had different ideas, so we ended up online. And also the city and the work that I was doing around the construction, all of that had to halt. But what we decided to do was to still program. And so one of the things that we've done is we have put out PPE kits to the neighborhood. There's a photo here of those kits as a way to provide people with something that they need during COVID-19. And so these kits included things made in makerspaces. You have the hands-free door handle, and that was made thanks to our friends over at Sears ThinkBox, which is a huge makerspace, 4 stories going up to 5 at Case Western Reserve University. And then we also had a community of folks sewing, who created the Olsen mask. And thanks to Jean-Luc for sharing what had been happening in his center around these masks as well. Also hand sanitizer, and then information about voting. You know, we want to be a community partner and asset that is not just thinking about immediate need, but also the things that will sustain us. And so that was important for us to put that in the kits. And so those first kits went out a couple of weeks ago. And thanks to funding from Neighborhood Up, we have additional dollars to do another round of kits that will go out into the neighborhood before the end of summer. We also have dollars to hire a neighborhood youth for a micro internship. And that student, that young person from the Glenville neighborhood will be helping us to connect in and talk with neighbors about how things are going for them right now, and just starting to spread the word about Fab House, building momentum there and sharing the kinds of things we're going to be doing. Another thing worth mentioning is a project through Literary Cleveland called Neighborhood Voices that they launched this summer, collecting the voices of people who live in neighborhoods or are connected to neighborhoods. And Glenville is one of those neighborhoods that had a small cohort of writers. I joined that project and wrote something, and these pieces are going to be published and shared with the community. And it was a way to connect in with other Tarblooders, other people from the neighborhood, and also to start to share some voice around what it is we're trying to accomplish with the Fab House project. And that really is the last slide. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Sonya. So I'm gonna, I don't have the very personal slide to start off with, but I definitely do want to go ahead and do that bit of housekeeping. So, first off, before I introduce myself, I am speaking from Boston, and the greater Boston area we recognize as the traditional indigenous territory of the Massachusetts Nation, who survive to this day through their lineal descendants, the Massachusetts tribe of Ponkapog. Myself, I'm a guest on these lands. I'm originally from New Orleans. I'm a member of the Tunica Biloxi tribe of Louisiana, and my name is Jean-Luc Pierite. working with the Fab Foundation as the International Logistics and Procurement Manager. But my full-time job that I don't get paid for is being president of the board of directors at the North American Indian Center of Boston, which is Massachusetts' oldest urban Indian center. We are now observing our 50th year of service to the New England Native American community. And so again, a bit of a reminder about language. So definitely, like when we talk about Native American, when we talk about Indigenous peoples, there are Indigenous peoples worldwide. Here in the Americas, there are people who are members of nations that are indigenous to the Americas, talking about North America, Central America, South America. But then here in the United States, primarily, we are categorized as American Indian, Alaska Native. So a bit of the method of like how I kind of structured this one, because it is a bit different from how Sonya was presenting. So as the oldest urban Indian center, we're sort of like tasked with promoting the health and general well-being of the New England Native American community. Nationwide, as a bit of a reminder, more than 78% of our total population live in urban areas. And we are impacted by issues of visibility and data equity. COVID-19 actually exacerbated the existing issues of employment placement, housing stability, food security, and mental health services. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, this is based on a lack of distinguishing our populations in reports of COVID-19 cases. So when the Commonwealth-wide Department of Public Health issues reports, including demographic data on who is actually affected by coronavirus, they do not distinguish who is American Indian or Alaska Native within those reports. We might, be categorized in, some of us are actually also Black, some of us are also Hispanic or Latino, and then, in other cases, we are just fitted into an other category. So there is a lack of visibility there. On the federal level, we face artificial reduction of our populations by updated rules in reporting identity. So speaking specifically about Census 2020, there are updated rules in which, in order to be counted as American Indian, you actually have to put only American Indian and put down your tribal affiliation. And NACOB, along with other urban Indian centers, and tribal governments, I should say, are having to do the public education work of instructing our constituencies on how to actually fill out the census. Because if they put American Indian and another ethnicity, then they are kicked into a multicultural category, which would reduce the numbers of American Indians within the United States. Not that we are actually lower, it's just that it shows that way on paper. Additionally, in an increasingly online remote work world, American Indian and Alaska Native households are affected by a digital divide. So both of these issues are actually tackled in the broader studies done by the National Urban Indian Family Coalition. If you have your smartphone, I did put up a QR code which actually links over to the resources page where you can get both of these reports. Weaving Our Web focuses on the digital divide, while Resiliency in Crisis talks about COVID-19. And actually this graphic on the top left talks about income inequality in the urban Indian Americas. So for instance, employment status for American Indian Alaska Natives, the labor force, we are, and I should actually let me skip to unemployment rate. 9% versus 4% for our white peers. Income assistance, American and Alaska Natives compared to white peers. Public cash assistance, we're at 6% versus 2% of overall population. Food stamps, at 25% of our population receiving assistance for food versus 9% of white peers. And at poverty rates, all individuals, 27% versus 11%. Yeah, so I'm going to just go ahead and go into the resources section. So I actually joined the board of NACOB in 2017. In 2018, that's when that first study came out about the digital divide. And in terms of like actually, you know, participating in this study, that's one thing. It's great we got the data out there, but then there was really an opportunity to do something about it. So in dealing with you know, problems that arise, the resources that we most rely upon outside of actual grant funding would be partnerships with other organizations and community member-led initiatives, which will expand cultural and social services for our community. In 2018, we started an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with Boston Makers. At that time, Boston Makers was actually going to their space, let me characterize it in the most proper way. They were going to lose their space, and we had space within NACOB that we were looking to use. And you know, the addition of Boston Makers within the Urban Indian Center itself, it led to this sort of like expansion of what we were already doing, which is, and I'll talk about it in a second, but I'll just flesh it out in a second. But we do have a workforce development program in which we do everything we can to help our community members earn full-time employment. So this is primarily like through skills acquisition, through resume writing assistance, through different like work experience training, anything that we can do to get our community members full-time employment. So we saw Boston Makers as a resource to build up skills acquisition. So with the MOU with Boston Makers, we were able to negotiate a rent that was reasonable for them for the use of space. However, in exchange, we were able to have complimentary memberships for our community members, so the New England Native American community. Also that year, a community member by the name of Amber Hampton came to us with a proposal for an Indigenous Peoples Coding Camp, which would will train our community members through full stack web development, and also introduce what's called soft skills, basically doing like whiteboard and job interview training, and also some resume writing as well. And we also expanded programming through the Timothy Smith Network. So for those who are not local to Boston, there's actually a neighborhood of Boston called Roxbury. NACOB is actually within the historical borders of that neighborhood. So we were able to establish a Timothy Smith Network computer lab within our building well before 2018. But in 2018, we started with Lego robotics for our youth, but then also youth within the neighborhood. So that's just some of the resources, and those are more geared towards dealing with the digital divide. And I think I'll kind of like talk a little bit more about resources in a little bit. So talking about short-term outputs in terms of like dealing with the pandemic first. So we do rely upon grassroots initiatives, and we help, you know, facilitate programming. to promote the health and well-being of our community members. We do, as I said, we do have a workforce development program. It is the Division of Indian and Native American Programs Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, which is funded through DOL. So again, that's where we do everything we can in order to find our community members full-time employment. But also during that time, so we were able to stay operational during this time through remote like follow-up between our staff and our clients. But then we also started to notice this this problem of data equity and visibility, and trying to wrap our heads around why exactly the Department of Public Health was not reporting our numbers for our community when it came to COVID-19. So we, in terms of like being responsive to the essential workers who are in our community, we started to come up with doing the homemade face mask. At first, we were doing the pleated mask, but then eventually through South End Technology Center and the Party for Socialism and Liberation, we were able to gain some training and some of the design files to use at Boston Makers to cut out pieces for assembly for the Olsen mask. So we were able to kind of diversify there. We actually converted our board meeting room into a sewing room. So these three photos at the bottom are actually from that sewing assembly room, which was formerly our board meeting room. We were doing, we did about, I think it was definitely over 800. I think we were closer to like 1,000 at this point, distributing out to different organizations as well. We worked with Mayans Without Borders in Milford, Massachusetts. So working within that intersection of the immigration issues, but then also providing for Indigenous peoples. Also within Milford, there is a church which its congregation is made up primarily of Quechua speakers from Ecuador. So we were able to distribute out hundreds of masks to both of those communities, mostly that had essential workers, the Quechua speaking church having a very significant population of construction workers. And also, in terms of being in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, and then trying to figure out, how can we also advocate for our issues. We helped to sort of organize this art action called Dismantle Now, in which we sent out a call to have various like expressive art pieces. So we were very concerned about participation from our elders and people with disabilities during July. So we called for people to decorate umbrellas, which actually had the added benefit of social distancing marchers. We also made up a big trash bag puppet of an octopus, in which we, at the end of the art action, we were actually able to kind of like symbolically dismantle white supremacy. So we had 7 pillars that we identified within the march, and there's some pictures of the march in the top right corner here. But we were able to sort of symbolically dismantle white supremacy through that art action. So those are some of the short-term outputs. As far as like long-term outputs, and then what does it mean to actually sort of promote well-being, but then also promote self-determination, self-efficacy, not just through digital fabrication, but using digital fabrication as part of that toolkit towards the promotion of self-determination. We actually, feel it is one of the key things that we definitely want to center is our educational initiatives, because we do believe that, you know, as we provide those educational opportunities, those actually increase civic engagement for our community members. So broader implications would be the Massachusetts Indigenous Legislative Agenda, which is made up of 5 core issues: establishing a statewide Indigenous Peoples Day, protecting Native American heritage, which is an issue of trying to, reinforcement efforts to keep our sacred objects, funerary objects, and human remains out of auction houses. Removing racist mascots. So in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there are 40 public schools that have Native Americans as their mascots. And changing up the flag and seal of Massachusetts. So there's coded settler colonial violence, legacy of that violence within the seal. So we're pushing for a commission to change that seal, and that was something that was championed for over 35 years by a former state representative by the name of Byron Rushing. And also we wanted to put forward, one of the things that NACOB actually directly consulted on was a special commission on American Indian and Alaska Native education within the Commonwealth. Both establishing a statewide Indigenous Peoples Day over what would be known nationally as Christopher Columbus Day, or in some other countries, you know, October 12th. That didn't make it out of committee in the state legislature, and the Education Commission also wasn't able to advance in this session, but we do hope to re-enter both during the next legislative session. Very quickly, we also participate in the Black Mass Coalition Blueprint for the New World, which is in part led, I want to be very careful about the politics of this, but like coordinated, I guess you could say, by the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, in which we have consulted on various targets for public and private sector to be responsive to Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities in terms of policy advocacy. We also are listed in the Racial Equity Capacity Builders Directory curated by the Boston Foundation. So if people both within public and private sector want to learn more about inclusion of Indigenous peoples within their organizations, they would be able to go to this directory and talk to somebody at a North American Indian Center in Boston to be able to provide that training to those organizations. And then also we participate in the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services Native American Team Project. I put this in the longer term outputs because this is a project that has been going on for over 7 years, which actually centers New England Native American traditional knowledge in terms of opioid addiction strategies. So there are several publications that came out. This last publication, Stories and Poems for Northeastern Native Tribal Families, is actually backed by a life skills training, which I believe is, I want to say nationally accredited. Let me make sure. I have my executive director on here, so I'm being very careful about my words. But yeah, those are some of the longer term outputs. But basically that's NACOB in a nutshell. I may have missed some things, but definitely wanted to kick it over to brainstorming and ideation. So Sonya, do you want to lead us in that?
Sure. Thank you so much, Jean-Luc. Every time we have these conversations, there's new learning. And so Lydia has been keeping me on time, and we really wanted to make sure we gave enough time to level set this conversation because it's not helpful to you to be able to help us brainstorm and ideate if you don't have enough background knowledge. So what we're going to do now is prepare ourselves to break up into 4 different groups. We've got a few facilitation leaders with us. I'll be taking on a group. Jean-Luc is taking on a group. And then we have Dawn Arrington and Cedric Blemon, who are also taking on a group. So thank you very much for facilitating. And what we'd like to have happen is up on the screen. Our vision for this session was to really imagine how to best collaboratively design and build community spaces, right, that are gonna help us cultivate change and create a more just and equitable community for invention. Jean-Luc shared a strategy in which FAB is a part of a larger strategy to support his community. I shared a strategy where I'm using FAB as a driver to support my community. But, you know, there are all different types of approaches that can be taken. I think what's most important is how do we center Black, Indigenous, and other people of color as we think about how to truly democratize digital fabrication. And so what we like for you to do is go into these breakout groups. You'll have about 15 minutes or so to just talk. And we know 15 minutes is not a ton of time, but if you just spend a little time talking about what this vision might look like, and it could be built upon the programs that we are leading, or it could be something completely different. And there are a few guiding questions here. Who's included? How does leadership manifest? What current and new resources can be used? How can you document the process for other people to consider? As Jean-Luc mentioned earlier, we are all living amidst the Black Lives Matter conversation right now. So everybody is trying to figure out something to do. We want them to do things well. And so if we come up with things that are good and well-intentioned, how do we make sure we share that with others? And then what might be a path where you could start on your vision today if you are trying to figure out how to do these kinds of things in your own community? And then most important, how will you know that it's been a success? So those are the things that we want you to spend a little time thinking about. You might only decide in your group to focus on 1 or 2 questions, and that's okay. So you don't have to select the facilitator. We've got 4 of those for you already. Someone should be taking notes, and someone should plan to report out for your group. If you, Lydia has placed some documentation in the chat. We do have a document that is available for you to share your notes in. And so you will use those to take notes so that we could put all those things together and share all of that information with you after the conference. And I think we're going to pause and get ready to go into our breakout groups. Does anybody have any questions? And Lydia, it looks like.
I just put it in the chat. The document is not editable. So for whoever will be note takers, it might be easier if you don't want the document to be fudged around with, to just copy it and paste it into a new document that you can share back with the group.
Yes, and it should be editable. So while you guys are moving on to groups, I will also look and try to see if we can get that fixed really quickly, Dawn. Thank you. Any other questions from anyone?
If not, I'm going to open all of the rooms.
All right.
Thanks, Lydia. We'll be back in about 15 minutes. Hello. We're back. Lydia, I'm not sure if Jean-Luc is going to do this, so maybe someone could put the slides back up, or do you need me to do that?
I can do it if you would like.
There's never enough time in the breakout groups.
Let me just get there.
And did we lose people, or are people still returning? Oh, they're still returning. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if we have everybody back, I'm going to go ahead and keep us moving along so we don't run out of time for the last slide. I believe we have 4 groups. And I will go ahead and pick on the group, my group to start. I was with Greg, Angela, Carlos, and Aaron. And I believe Angela is going to report out for us. If people could take like a minute, just give a highlight of what you discussed.
Oh my God.
You'll have the notes.
Yes.
Want me to still screen share while I'm writing the notes from everyone? Is that okay?
You can, but honestly, you don't even have to because they're notes. People took notes.
Okay, I'll stop the share.
Sorry about that, Angela.
Okay, so, oh, excuse me. Oh, here I am. Well, we discussed a little bit in our group. I was telling that in Brazil we have 2 great problems. That is, it's really difficult for Black people to achieve the same level of knowledge and studies than the others, no, than the white. And so we have here I didn't say this in the group, but we have a politician that is for coats. So we have coats at the university for the Black and for the impaired people too. But it is not it doesn't work so much. It has, in the last years, the situation has been better because of these codes, but it doesn't solve the problem. No, I was talking about my case in personal, that I have the Fab Academy course here in the node. I am the node in Brazil for Fab Academy, and so many interesting, especially women, Black people would like to make the course, but they don't have money to pay. Neither the white people are having the money to pay the courses. So it would be great if we could have some foundation that could expend money to give this opportunity to these people. No, so excuse me. Okay. So also about the still the Black people, we have a very interesting initiative in the OLAB Makerspace, that is a Fab Lab in Rio de Janeiro, that has a program called that Black woman guiding the technology, or given the subject to discuss and to the new projects of technology in the lab. So this have a lot of women, and is giving better chance for many people. And I think we have to give this opportunity since the scholar, no, the high school and so on, the fundamental school. And also about the Indians, we have facing a very, very bad problem here, because our government even give any chance for protecting them, and many of them are disappearing because of the COVID. So we have so many problems. I would like that, I think Cedric, you can know who were with us. I don't.
It's okay, Angela. I'll take
Okay,
it from here.
because yes,
Thank
thank
you
you.
for reporting now. And we also have notes, so people
Greg,
can reference
Greg.
notes.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Angela. Jean-Luc, I think you were gonna report out for your group.
Yeah, so so somebody stole Angela from me, but I ended up with Terry and Christy. Terry being from Tampa and Christy being from Aruba. One of the intersections in both communities that they serve was the Caribbean population, and from Terry's case. Their space is in an old urban mall, which is currently being redeveloped into a mixed-use city center. It's in a high poverty area and is in an opportunity zone. But one of the things that we were talking about was trying to figure out a way in which the lab actually reflects the community in which it's in. We came up with several questions. You know, how do people want to use the area that they're in? How do we reach populations that deem that the area is their home? How do we reach the key people, like for instance a student who is passionate about programming? Lots of important questions, but one of the things that kind of emerged out of our conversation was sort of a celebration of Caribbean culture. So in Terry's case, it was providing a display space so that the local community could come in, use the lab, but then come up with a storefront display for Caribbean Heritage Month. Or in Christy's case, there was a really interesting project where for Carnival, and it was a collaboration with the YMCA, I believe, they were constructing headpieces which were lit up with LEDs and programmed through Arduino. You know, that like the celebration aspect and how people actually kind of like do the expression of their culture through the technologies. Those were kind of the things that we were talking about bringing people in from the local community.
Awesome. Thanks, Jean-Luc. Cedric, can you give us like a 1.5 minute summary?
Oh boy. So in our group, so for example, Pamela said that location is important. People might not see themselves connected to the space depending on where it is. So that might play a role in how to bridge with the community. We also mentioned that simple outreach program can go a long way. So for example, just having open houses and just making sure that people come in and check out the space. She insisted that she's seen that working in many other places. Then Katie mentioned that she brings a mobile lab to a whole bunch of different places, and that she's working on diversity by actually reaching out to them. So it might not be necessarily, you know, coming into a space, but maybe actually going to them. We also talked about the fact that the content itself might play an important role. So for example, Ellie mentioned that when she starts with a group, she tends to go to an engineering subject, but as soon as she sees that it doesn't catch, she switches to something more art related. So that might also play an important role. And she also mentioned that exposure is critical. So for example, having people, you know, see the space several times might have a positive impact on their ability to join and use it. And I guess that's a minute and a half. We had some interesting note from Pamela that says, you know, people scan the room when they enter. So sometimes it's as simple as having things they can relate to when they see the space, whether it's people, things that makes them feel comfortable.
Great advice. Thank you. Dawn, can you give us a 1.5 minute summary of your group or whoever was in that group? I'm not sure who's.
I say no, I cannot, but Raquel can.
Okay, Raquel, yay. Thank you.
Hi, Raquel.
You're muted, Raquel.
Is that better?
Yes.
Perfect. We started with what success looks like for each of us. We were a room comprised of a high school teacher, a nonprofit executive director, and a makerspace member in DC working towards setting up a makerspace in each ward of the city. So for us collectively, we identified that as looking like a room where voices feel represented, where each voice feels represented. That is what success looks like in the school setting. For me, in the nonprofit setting, it looks like two things. One, are we seeing evidence that our prevention strategies are working in relation to our intervention work? And two, are we increasing our capacity or our ability to respond to the needs of the community both quickly and adequately? Because we know the human experience is not going to change. We can do things to prevent pain, addiction, what have you, but that's still something that we're going to see and have to deal with. And for our makerspace member, it looks like Kent, you can add to the notes, but I kept hearing from you. It looks like that each community was able to feel a certain sense of ownership and was able to protect their makerspace in a way that was unique to them. So really making things feel like they are part of one's community and one's home. Then we moved on to what resources make this successful. We sort of danced around terms that I think we're getting at very similar or the same things for each of us in a different way. We talked about team, making sure your team is there and you can trust them. Faculty, being able to rely on the expertise of others, mentorship, and then of course, Don reminded us that we need money to do these things. We need access to capital to be flexible and to experience failure and success. And then we didn't really have that much time to get into reflecting on how each of us has started this work already. But we were able to get one response that, and I think it's absolutely applicable to each of us, that a core group of kids is excited and then feels able to peer lead and does peer lead. So for each of us, I think that works. I can't do this work without someone else taking on ownership and carrying on the message. And that's the whole point, because I don't want to do this forever. And someone else needs to be able to do that work too. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That's magic, right? We are not trying to carry these loads by ourselves. Well, you all have been an amazing group. We are a little over by 2 minutes. We did want to share this last slide. Lydia, if you could make it presenter view. And we wanted an opportunity for each of you to give us closing thoughts, particularly if it wasn't really captured in our exercise. And so there is a link here, and we'll add it to the chat as well, along with the password to something called Menti.com. And the goal is for you all to be able to just share any closing thoughts after going through this session with us today. And what we can do is download what people share and then share that out to you later so that you can see it. It is anonymous. And so that's an opportunity for you to do that. And then we had our own, call for action here for you. This whole conversation about, right sizing and addressing social justice issues in BIPOC communities is not something that's going to magically happen overnight. And it's really important that people are educating themselves. And so we have a few resources here in an Excel sheet for people to continue conversations, continue reading and learning. We would also encourage you to add to this document. Everything is not there. And so if there are useful things that you have come across, books, podcasts, websites, whatever they may be, please feel free to add. I'm speaking now specifically around Fab House. I'm really excited about this project and to get it on the ground, but there's a lot of work that needs to happen, including money, like Dawn mentioned. And so if people are interested in helping us resource raise or volunteer, please email me or our Fab House email at the Fab Foundation. If you want to be an instructor in residence next year when we are open, I would love to have you. Also donate. We are taking money. Please feel free to do that. And then there's also a tracking tool. This is something that I think is super important for all of us. And that is to hold corporations and nonprofits accountable for the different commitments that are being made right now. There's a tracking tool and a wonderful PowerPoint deck resource that's available there in order for you to think about ways to do that. And then, of course, I'm going to pause so that my colleague Jean-Luc can share a little bit more about his call for action for you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, of course, you can do to keep up with North American Indian Center of Boston, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, NACOB on Facebook, NACOB 91 on Twitter and Instagram. And I think I'm going to toss it to my executive director for any other calls to action. Raquel.
I'm going to go with Dawn's answer. We always appreciate resources. If you're local to Boston, or if you can do some remote work, we would love to talk about volunteering, but we do rely on the donations to get out, in particular, all these masks and supplies to community members in lieu of COVID or in response to COVID. And that can be found on our website, and you can do that through PayPal at you're using PayPal, and the email address is info@nacob.org.
All right.
Thank you all so much. And you guys, I would be remiss if I did not say thank you to my husband, Alan Jones. I noticed he popped in. So I didn't get a chance to acknowledge him earlier. But you all have been wonderful, and please be in touch. We are accessible. Thank you.
Thank you all.